It's recording, right?
I don't see it yet, but I believe it'll. Oh, there you go.
There it
Perfect.
is. All right. Um, so I want to welcome Matt. Matt, would you like to go first with the introductions, and I
Oh,
can?
sure. Thank you, Dr. Sharma, and the wonderful Student Counseling Center for inviting me in today for this Pride in the South Asian Community breakout session. So I'm very, very excited to be with y'all. My name is Matt Windsor-Johns. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm the Assistant Director for LGBTQ plus programs in our Gender Center. When we're back on campus, I usually point. It's right next to the Counseling Center on the same floor. So we're very lucky to be on the same floor because we consult with each other a lot. So very excited, and I just want to give another shout out to Dr. Sharma. Dr. Sharma is one of our presenters in our Safe Zone Ally program, which trains people how to be allies for the LGBTQ plus community. So we're very thankful to have Dr. Sharma on our committee.
Thank you, Matt, for that introduction, and thank you for joining us for this presentation. We just so deeply value our partnership with the Gender Center, and even both the programmings that we, co-collaborate on, Safe Zone and the Culture of Equity, has been so deeply meaningful to all of us to be involved in as clinicians. So really, really value that partnership. And we will be talking about both of our centers and services in terms of diversity and equity. So we will talk more about that towards the end. There will be some resources coming your way. But today I wanted to start first with, so I'm going to be sharing my PowerPoint here in a second. All right, can you all see? Okay, great. So I wanted to really start with, I think, I joined UTD about a year ago, have sort of joined in the virtual format. And we have, as you all know, we have a huge Southeast Asian population on campus. A large part of our student body is from South Asia, whether it's international students, first or second gen students who are coming to us. And oftentimes I know that we are not as represented in terms of leadership. And certainly there is still sort of lack of knowledge and understanding and a sense of community within our LGBTQ community. So the intersection of both of those identities. And we don't really have conversations around that. Like, what does it mean to be South Asian and be queer? And like, what does that mean? And how do I navigate school and life? So hopefully through this presentation, we can kind of bring more awareness and light to just some unique struggles of what it means to be part of the queer community, but also being South Asian. And what are some of the challenges that we face, but also strengths that we bring, and what are resources in the communities. So I wanted to kind of share out with that. So I might be using the term South Asian, and I'll probably be using the term queer as well. So just wanted to kind of talk more so about that, because for a lot of people, like when we say South Asian, we think of like this monolithic people with like similar values and culture. It is actually, when we really sort of break it down, it's part of like many different countries. So Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Maldives, Burma, Myanmar, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Tibet. So you can just see like these are like pretty diverse countries with diverse representation, language, religion, caste system, which is sort of unique to India too. So I was born and brought up in India, so I can speak a little bit more competently or more closely with that culture, but certainly there are some pieces that are similar, but there are also some pieces that are different based on what part of South Asia we come from. And when I use the word queer, it is just, a term to affirm and reflect anybody who's within the umbrella of the LGBTQIA identities, and just kind of like putting more into contextually into like the entire gender spectrum we were talking about, and the sexual orientation and gender expression spectrum too. So we'll be talking sort of about those things, and you might hear me, use those terms as we go ahead. So looking at South Asia, again, pretty diverse group of countries here. India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan. And I sort of bring that, and I like always like to see map too, because I think it sort of helps people relocate themselves and just kind of geographically see where we are. Um, and although we do, in terms of like our student population here, we do have significant amount of students more so from India, Nepal, and Pakistan. We do have some representation from the other countries as well. And particularly at the counseling center, we are really mindful of where students come from, and really try to provide services that are sort of culturally relevant, and taking into account where they're sort of culturally based and what are the important aspects of their identity. So just to share a little bit about myself to kind of help you all contextually understand. I grew up in India. I moved here as a teenager, so I consider myself like generation 1.5. So there's some values that I still hold of my home country of India, but I'm also kind of pretty assimilated to the culture in the US. So I certainly sort of see the unique challenges of what it means to be an immigrant, and kind of can see that with our international students, but I also kind of can relate very closely with students who are born and brought up here, and the internal cultural, struggles that they face versus, their parents might be from more seeped into their home culture, but they could kind of not feel that way. And I just, and I can kind of speak to maybe the way I grew up, really did not have a lot of, knowledge or understanding of gender and sexuality. Um, at least in India, there's still talking about sex is extremely taboo. We really don't talk about gender. I think the only visible aspects of gender that we see and that we sort of acknowledge, which is not so much part of the US, is that we have a Hijra community, which is a community of transgender folks. So that's more so part of our culture and part of our understanding, and we're sort of aware of more transgender rights. But given the spectrum of sexual orientation, there's really not much talked about. So it's been an education for me to move from coming from that, where we don't really talk about sex and sexuality, to coming to the US and then sort of getting more exposed to just the diverse, spectrum that it is, and then kind of moving away from that dichotomy. And really been very, very grateful. I consider myself as an ally, and have felt really grateful for family and friends who are from the LGBTQ community, have educated me, and I've had to kind of go back and learn myself, and learn how to be an ally, and also educate my fellow immigrants, my fellow South Asians on the wonderful diversity of identities within the South Asian community. So sometimes even we think of ourselves as pretty monolithic, but we are not. We are kind of come from different religions and castes and backgrounds, and just kind of even talking about homophobia in our community, talking about transphobia in our community, really sort of pushing some of those conversations, and acceptance. So I've been really grateful for those experiences, and also been really sort of grateful for students that I've worked with over the years, across different states, because I've worked in many different states. So have worked with students who have come from Burma, who have been refugees, who have come from India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and unique experiences in their way of, when they moved or their family moved, and learning acceptance, whether within themselves or within their communities or families. And it is a deeply painful process for some of them, not so much. And we will talk about that in terms of just how complex it can be for some of us, to navigate that, because we hold such different values at times from the culture that that is present here. So I'll talk about some of the layers of that. So hopefully that will sort of help you understand more contextually how different experiences could be, even though folks are sort of coming from South Asia, your experience of acceptance and love for yourself, and for your family could look and feel very different, based on where you're at. So just wanted to kind of mention the heterogeneity within all of these different countries. There is tremendous diversity of culture, dietary preferences, religious traditions, languages. Our immigration histories are very different. So how our parents or grandparents immigrated, how we immigrated, how we are sort of navigating the model minority myth, which is, we are kind of held as the standard of that, oh, you can reach your potential. Look at, Asians and South Asians, look, they're doing so well. So that all of those messages sometimes get internalized in terms of we are not allowed to struggle. Like we are not allowed to bring attention to our unique struggles, or that, we should just have it easy because we've just seen everyone else in our community do better. So we have really taken that model minority myth and really internalized it. And there's some push of sort of white adjacency, right? Like a lot of times we want to, we would discriminate against other groups, racial and ethnic groups, and there's anti-Blackness in our community. So all of these layers kind of make it sort of a unique experience when you are a queer person in South Asian community. So just kind of holding all of those pieces, and even thinking about caste in India too, where you are based on your caste system, your experience of being accepted into the community, and even access to resources can be very different. So we are holding all of these multiple identities as we kind of live in the US and try to thrive and find our communities here. So just sort of looking back a little bit of brief history of the LGBTQ community in South Asia. As I sort of looked back, and I think this is sort of a common knowledge within at least our community, is that before we were colonized, before Britishers came and occupied parts of South Asia, there's tons of literature and examples of same-gender relationships. We have talked. It was celebrated, accepted. We saw being transgender, being third gender, sort of welcoming, and they were inclusive, and community spaces were there. It shows up in just not literature; it shows up in art. So like Kama Sutra was written right around 400 BC or to 200 BC. So there are sort of narratives of same-gender relationships. There have been books. There have been famous kings and people in power and rulers who had same-gender partnerships. So we used to be pretty inclusive community up until we got colonized by the Western world. And I think the first sort of the discrimination laws that came into being was around 1861, and that was imposed for the entire British Empire. And we see the remnants of that sort of extending even today, where we still have many discriminatory laws on our books. So I'll just quickly share my screen for a second, because I just wanted you all to kind of take a look at this, because I thought that this was really fascinating. Let me see if I can share. Matt, is it showing up?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So just wanted to kind of share this with all of you here. So we can kind of go state by state, country by country, but you can see just LGBTQ rights, same-sex recognition, same-sex marriages, adoption by same-sex couples, discrimination, anti-discrimination laws that are there, or laws concerning gender expression. So the law that was written in 1861, as recent as 2018, when it was actually finally struck down by the Supreme Court. So you can just kind of see now that it's after so many decades and years that we have been sort of finally able to, at least in India, like it's not criminalized to be in a same gender relationship. So a lot of these things sort of still persist, and you can see just as you look at different countries, this was really like revealing to me that folks in this country still live in a lot of fear, and rightfully so. Like in Maldives, you basically have no rights, and no legal protection, if you belong to the LGBTQ community. There seems to be a little bit more, at least legal protections for transgender folks. And as recently as I think a few years ago, at least on your driver's license and your identity, transgender people could note as being the third gender. So it was just not seen as binary anymore, which was a big step for the transgender community in India. So I think this, all of this kind of really goes to show that even when we come from these countries, we can still hold some of these values still might be intact when you move, right? Some of these transphobia is still intact, homophobia is still intact when you move from the countries of origin. So just want to take a pause here. And Matt, would you want to add something or?
Yeah, in fact, I'm so glad you shared that because I was myself Googling, which is a great thing to do when you don't know about a specific community or specific laws that might exist. So this is another resource, and I'm putting in the chat. I do want to preface this by saying the last time this was updated was February of 2018. So something might have changed. To my knowledge, it hasn't, but please know that this is from February of 2018. This particular resource, which spans across different Asian communities, but I will tell you this, and this is something that Dr. Sharma and I talked about recently. A big eye-opening moment for me, to be brutally honest, especially as a white, gay, cisgender man, is when students come into my office and say, I'm fearful about being outed to my family. My first thought is like, what resources can I give them to affirm them if they do choose to come out? And I will just tell you very briefly a story that I told Dr. Sharma recently. I had a student that is no longer at the university; they've graduated, but from Bangladesh, and BSO just has a special place in my heart because our wonderful administrative assistant Ashfia Salamin is from Bangladesh, and just got a chance to connect with BSO and had really fun experiences. But I talked to one particular student that was fearful that they got outed to their family by a friend at UTD. And I was trying to help them strategize about what to do. And a moment of clarity for me is that when we are talking to anybody, it's so important to know about what laws exist because, in my mind, I was thinking, oh, how can I help them? If they get disinvited from Thanksgiving, or that's where my very Western mind was at the moment, and privileged mind. But this particular student was like, no, I could be killed, ousted from my family, a variety of things if they find out my identity. So that was a moment of reset for myself, and a lot of, especially people in America, we're so focused on our own experience. And it was a moment where I realized I've got to do my research as an ally to these communities, what laws exist, because coming out might not just be, hard for them. It might be completely unsafe. So what protections can I share with them? What even temporary housing facilities, like what kind of things can I give them? So the Gender Center, we've been trying to expand our resources to make sure that our advice to students is also steeped in the laws that exist wherever they might come from.
And thank you, Matt, for sharing that, because I think a lot of times that's why it's so hard, I think, for South Asians to kind of access services, because at times the worry is that then there will be this mindset that, oh, you can just push back or leave your families, or it's so much more complicated for us, because families are like our primary support structure system, and sometimes there's real danger of being killed and being seriously harmed or injured. That this is such a lived experience for all of us. So I'm so glad that, Gender Center has been such a great partnership in that we are kind of extending out more our resources and thinking more so specifically about what are sort of unique needs of our South Asian students. So just wanted to kind of talk a little bit more about specifically about our culture and what sort of makes it really complex from what it means to be, queer in South Asian community. Something that sort of been really, like I kind of talked about, there's just not enough education and understanding. So I hear from students again and again, they, when you're not allowed to talk about sex or sexuality, you sometimes don't even have language to put around your own experience when you're attracted to somebody from the same gender, or the gender that you were assigned at birth doesn't feel like who you are. But then where do you find information on that? Where do you go to? Who do you go to? Because clearly at home, that's not a safe place to be able to talk about. I was, listening to this this person's story around being asexual, and then just having a really hard time sort of explaining that to their parents and what that means, because they were just, never given a language around it, and then really struggling with it and staying in closet, so to speak, for a really long time because they just didn't know how to approach their family. And with that comes, many, many years of pain and suffering and isolation. And also that is, something that's really, and there's lack of knowledge on both ends, right? We're not hearing about any of this in our families, but also when we do try to talk to our parents about this, they don't know. They don't really know. They don't have any access to any resources. So some parents eventually find PFLAG, and I'll share some resources with you for parents who Desi parents. This is another word that we use for being from South Asia. There's also some, support systems for people from South Asia, for parents and families to, just learn some knowledge around it. And if you are interested, and wanted to give a shout out to Safe Zone too, we do with Gender Center hosts, and we do like a series, a 3-part series, Safe Zone training, and that's open to student, faculty, and staff, and some community members too, right? Not together, right? Yeah. And I think that's, it's just a great place to start. If you have somebody in your life or you're yourself, just learning, how to support each other and yourself, it can be a really great place to sort of start for yourself. And even in that, we really try to make it more inclusive in terms of different and multiple identities and how, those identities kind of intersect with each other. And I also, hear from a lot of students that they say, my parents have gone through so much. So, when you grow up in immigrant families, you're always told, I came to US with $20 in my pocket and look what where I am today. So I hear this from students again and again. I can't put this on my parents. Like I can't I can't tell them who I am. It would bring too much pain and shame and suffering to my family. What do I have to complain about? They have gone through so much. And then that's a story that I hear, there's so much sadness and difficulty around disappointing your parents. So being who you are feels like disappointment to your parents. And, those are some of the ways my South Asian students really struggle with. They want to be who they are, they're looking for community, but then, they really don't want to disappoint their parents, and embracing all parts of who they are can then be really, really difficult. So at times, a lot of our work is to kind of work through the internalized homophobia, but we are also kind of figuring out what it would mean to continue being in your family, ways in which you can show up authentically, because for a lot of students that I work with, that's not an option. To be who they are back home is not an option. That is just something they wouldn't consider. Sometimes kind of deep, rightfully so, the fear of rejection. At times, worries about their safety. So I've heard from students that they were either physically abused, emotionally abused, because they shared with their family they were gay or lesbian. So there's some real threats to their safety. And then there are times, they just really don't want to disappoint their parents. So they want to stay integrated in their family. They don't want to be pushed out or thrown out. So those are some real fears that we sort of navigate within. And I think even for me, as being from South Asia, like I have to hold all of those pieces because we have to sort of honor and acknowledge what it means to be from South Asian community and also being queer. Like you have to hold both of those identities together. And then another thing that is very common in our community is about log kya kahenge, which is basically what would other people think. So we just don't concern ourselves with like our families. We have to kind of think about our communities and what their expectations are of us, and just some worry. Even sometimes, that's communicated through parents who are always like, we'll talk about, oh, what would this auntie would say, or what this uncle would say, or, what would our extended family would say. And then, at times being asked to not be who you are or to hide parts of yourself. So maybe you're safe being, coming out to your family, but you're not allowed to come out to your extended family. You're not allowed to come out to your community. And navigating all of that can, again, sort of adds a lot of pain, anxiety and depression. And that can sort of add further to feelings of marginalization. Also hear from our students that a lot of spaces, LGBTQ spaces, are not accessible to them. Because when we think about, at least in the US, when we think about Pride movement, when we think about LGBTQ rights, we think of typically white people, right? So even when my students have accessed some of these spaces, they have felt racism within those spaces and not feeling accepted. And a lot of times there is sometimes internal struggle of which parts of me do I embrace? Like I am a South Asian, but I'm also a queer person. So how do I integrate too? Does it mean that do I have to give up my identity as being South Asian to be a queer person in America? Like, what does that mean? And there is, when you really think about it, there isn't a whole lot of representation in media of South Asian who belong to the queer community, right? I can maybe count maybe three or four. And when Lily Singh came out last year, I think like that, as she came out as bi, and that was big for our community because we needed that representation. We needed, we've been sort of looking for, and when folks from South Asian community come out, it can be a really sort of life-defining, changing moment for South Asian folks, because we really sort of lack that representation, at least in terms of media. And a lot of times, we are sort of navigating guilt and shame within that, around our identities. So these are all sort of different aspects of being South Asian and being a queer person, and sort of navigating some of those things. So oftentimes, I really like this post that QSWA posted. It says, "We are queer, we are desi, we are valid, we belong." So with my students, I talk about sort of similar things. If there are ways in which, you have to know, like, there is a support system for you out there. I'll share some resources shortly, so you'll have them. There are books, there is media, movies, even in India, like there is a movement going on of representation, of pride, of, our stories as queer people, like really being able to sort of talk about it. And so things are also shifting in India. At least I don't know so much about other countries as such, but there has been, and it has come with a lot of advocacy, whether it's of individuals or groups of people. There has been more of a conversation around the rich diversity of gender and sexual orientation that we have. So ways in which, how can we like support each other and find spaces for ourselves. First is to like find these online communities. There are tons of resources out there. There's something for you out there. And if you don't find that community, you can create one for yourself. So a lot of times, at least now with, being online, there's a little bit easier access to be able to kind of create a community of your own, create a meetup group wherever you're at. And also, there are times when we have to sort of balance what living authentically means. So finding spaces, reaching out to your peers, reaching out to the community. There are resources on campus. There's Gender Center. We offer groups. Um, so know that there are still spaces where you can live authentically, where you can be who you are, you can find acceptance. And at times, and this is a difficult conversation for me to have with my South Asian students, you have to kind of build some healthy boundaries with even family members, because if you're going continuously into spaces where you're getting re-traumatized, and you're getting the same kind of messages that are toxic to your mental health, that can over time be really, really difficult unless you have some safe spaces for yourself. So even at times, just kind of saying no to certain things and pulling away emotionally if you need to, and sort of defining more so what you need in a relationship, can go a long way. And particularly, I think I tell this to students often, like as you grow up, like you feel a little more empowered in your relationships with people you care about, and you have more of a say, and you get to sort of negotiate and see how much you want involvement of your parents, or your community or family. Um, there are a lot of sort of cultural or religious groups as well. So there is Muslim queer community, Sikh queer community. So there are communities of color that you can kind of access online and be part of that. And some other ways to feel empowered is to get involved and do advocacy work. And I think that's like, you really have to kind of do some of your own work, and you have to be in a space where you're ready to do that. But just knowing that's available to you, that you can be a practicing Hindu, and you can be queer, like you can be transgender, and you can be Muslim, you can be all of those things at the same time, and that you don't really have to pick and choose which parts of yourself are most important. So just wanted to kind of share that. Any other parts, Matt, that I'm forgetting and not including?
I was just gonna say, I'm so sorry. I like put so many things in the chat, and people probably like, what is going on? But I put 3 things in the chat that Dr. Sharma said that are so important, and I just wanted to link some resources to those. Starting with, I know scrolling up, I put a lot. And if you're watching this on YouTube, we'll link it in the bio as well, so you can have these resources. But a glossary of terms from the Human Rights Campaign, like Dr. Sharma was saying, talking about an asexual identity, like what is that? And in the beautiful world we live in now of Google and all these wonderful resources, there's some good and some bad resources. Make sure you get some good ones. But this is a glossary of terms that just defines some terms that your friends or your coworkers or your colleagues might use. And then secondly, Dr. Sharma was talking about representation within the queer South Asian community. And I found this wonderful article which actually referenced one of the people that you were talking about. But I couldn't help but think Tan France from Queer Eye, he actually came on campus, gosh, 2018 now, part of an event that the innovation and entrepreneurship, I can never say that word, their department hosted Tan France, and it was so amazing to hear his perspective and what it means to be queer in the South Asian community, and where he is now and what he's done on the platform that he has. And I just became such a fan, bought his book, just Naturally Tan is what it's called. Perfect. But this article talks about representation is just the beginning. First, and I don't hold these identities, so I just want to echo what Dr. Sharma said of sometimes the struggle that I'm reading and researching is that people feel like they have to pick between being South Asian or queer. And just like Dr. Sharma was saying, we are people, we're layered. We have a video we show in Safe Zone where someone talks about getting a spoon and digging down deep with all the different layers that you have. And that's always resonated with me because in the queer community, people often see photos, especially in the US,
Mhm.
and it's of people that look like me, white gay men. And so much of that is so not true. One of the biggest movements in the United States, the Stonewall riots in 1969, the same year UT Dallas was founded. Many of the photos from that event, from that series of events, were of white gay men, but really Black trans women were really the ones that started the movement. So there's a lot of erasure that happens, especially within our South Asian queer communities. And then lastly, the last resource that I just wanted to share, I thought this was pretty cool for my own research, and I hope you find this helpful as well. But it's entitled Six of the Best LGBTQ plus South Asian Books to Read for Pride Month. So I want to, I guess, encourage you to reach out to the Gender Center, and I'm going to put my email here in the chat. Um, so if you find a book that you really want to read and you're like, I'm a college student, I can't just be buying all these books that are like $30 a pop. We have a resource collection in the Gender Center that we buy all types of gender equity and LGBTQ plus equity books. So if you find a book that you want, and I was telling Dr. Sharma this, students, faculty, or staff, send the list to me, and we can buy them with funds that we have in the university, and we can put them in our library. You can rent them for free for 2 weeks at a time. So look at I'm actually going to order all 6 of these books, just so you know, to make sure that our resources are as inclusive and intersectional as possible. These are actually wonderful books. But I just wanted to throw those in the chat and just talk. Lastly, I have one more resource. Sorry, Dr. Sharma, I'm like putting
Oh,
way too much in the chat.
it's really helpful. Thank you, Matt.
Yes. Let me say this. I just sent this to a student, this particular resource. We have wonderful services. And actually, as you can see with Dr. Sharma, someone that you can talk to in the Student Counseling Center. Now, if you graduated or you have a friend that isn't at UT Dallas and can't access our Student Counseling Center, this is called the API Healer Network. And it talks about different ways, therapies, meditations that are led by queer South Asian people. So this is a really great resource because we have to stop Asian hate, especially at UTD, because it happens. I know that many of you probably have experienced this. So if we can do anything the Gender Center to make sure that your time at UTD and after UTD is successful, please let us know. Even if it's like, hey, y'all need to be doing this better, we are listening, and we want to make sure your community is heard and represented fully at UT Dallas.
Thank you for sharing those resources, Matt. I think just sort of understanding the unique intersection of all of these identities and like being able to find information that really speaks to our own experiences as being South Asian, like that's really, really helpful. Thank you. What I'm going to do is that just wanted to add a quick plugin, and then I'm going to stop recording, and then we'll just create it as like an open space for questions. So like just like last piece, and thank you, Matt, for giving us a shout out. Get mental health support. It's just so important, and you can find affirming, inclusive spaces at the counseling center, and certainly could request to work with me or anybody else on our staff. We all, those are like some of the most important values of our system. So certainly reach out. All of this sort of living constantly in a space that's invalidating to you can feel extremely difficult and can take a toll on your mental health. Oppression, prejudice shows up, and you're just not at times navigating racism, you're navigating homophobia, transphobia. So you're navigating all of those things. So just to know that we are here for you on campus. Get mental health, get support. You deserve it. You already pay for these services, so why not use it while you're on campus? So just wanted to give a plug-in for the Counseling Center. I'm just going to quickly take us off recording so we can kind of create an open space for questions.